Welcome to the Plain Books Podcast. Welcome, everyone, to what I think is a truly special episode. Today we are exploring leadership under, well, instantaneous crisis.
We're getting right into the heart of extreme political pressure with this book, 107 Days by Kamala Harris.
And it is a riveting account. I mean, it's almost a minute-by-minute look at a political universe just turning completely upside down.
This book is fascinating. It
Yeah.
really is. Because it doesn't wait for history to judge, it sort of creates it in real time.
Right.
It covers those pivotal 107 days right before the election, starting with the just spectacular and completely unexpected chaos of that first presidential debate.
And it goes into the strategic pivots, the, lightning-fast decisions that were required.
And maybe, most importantly, the profound personal cost of this kind of high-stakes public service.
And our mission for you, the listener, in this episode isn't just to recap what happened.
No.
We want to perform a deep tissue scan of the material. We really want to pull out those essential nuggets.
The lessons.
The lessons, exactly. The lessons on crisis management, personal resilience, and, defining your own path.
Things you can actually apply.
Yes. Things you can apply to your own life, whether you're managing a team or launching a new venture or just navigating some kind of overwhelming professional upheaval.
So this whole episode, we're going to discuss the book, its stories, its quotes, and really try to find those practical lessons.
Absolutely. So to appreciate the scale of the crisis that erupts, we first have to understand the environment just before it all kicked off.
Right. Before day one, according to the book, Harris describes the campaign operating with this sort of frantic, pre-programmed normalcy.
Yeah, she had just arrived from this huge, very energized campaign event in Provincetown, Massachusetts.
VPTO2, I think they called it.
That's the one. She mentions this huge rainbow-colored sign, VPTO2N. But she also notes that even in that supportive environment, there was this palpable tension.
People were already anxious.
They were. They weren't just excited. They were asking her really pointed questions, 3 weeks after the disastrous debate.
So that anxiety wasn't just anticipation. It was already kind of baked into the collective consciousness of the campaign.
Exactly. And this is where we see this fundamental conflict in crisis leadership. You have the need for discipline versus this overwhelming external chaos.
And Harris describes trying to maintain her rituals, her routine.
Which is so important.
It is.
Mm-hmm.
She needed her half-hour workout on the elliptical. She was just wearing sweatpants and an old Howard University sweatshirt.
Mm-hmm.
And she'd promised her family a completely normal breakfast.
Bacon and sausage with pancakes.
Exactly. Trying to hold on to something normal.
Okay, let's just unpack that psychological strategy for a second. The world is teetering on a political precipice, right?
Mm.
And yet she is deliberately clinging to the mechanical rhythm of an elliptical and a simple family breakfast.
It's a remarkable illustration of how high-level leaders use routine as a kind of psychological anchor.
It really is, and it makes you think, and we'd ask you, the audience, to consider this. How do you maintain routine and focus when you're anticipating something immense, something destabilizing in your professional life?
That ability to impose order, even in these small ways like a workout, it just speaks volumes about the self-discipline required just to maintain your sanity.
But that little slice of normalcy was, of course, about to be instantly and, brutally shattered.
By the crisis that had been festering since the debate itself.
Which brings us right to the debate preparation. The book describes it in almost harrowing terms. It says it was awful.
Designed to break you to make you?
That phrase, it just suggests a psychological intensity that goes so far beyond standard policy prep,
Absolutely. The function of that kind of debate camp, especially for an incumbent, it's not to be kind.
No.
It is to savage every single delivery point, to prod at every weakness you might have, find holes in every argument. It's brutal.
And Harris noted that even before the debate, Joe Biden sounded, and this is a quote, downbeat and extremely tired.
He was worried. He was worried about his energy, his delivery fears that unfortunately just metastasized right there on the actual stage for everyone to see.
The moment that triggered the political cataclysm, the starting gun for these 107 days of chaos, is recounted so vividly in the book.
He was trying to defend complex policy. And in his attempt to be so painstakingly accurate, he just sounded profoundly hesitant.
But the absolute disaster, the gaffe that burned itself into political memory, came at the end of this string of convoluted sentences where he
confused millions and billions.
And then, in a moment of just utter disorientation, he blurts out, "We finally beat Medicare."
Ugh, That phrase was immediate political poison. It
Instantaneous.
became the instant, undeniable emblem of the campaign's collapse. He was trying to talk about progress on lowering drug costs, but the delivery just made it sound like he was celebrating the end of a foundational social safety net.
He looked totally lost.
And that visual confirmation was the problem. People saw it with their own eyes.
Which leads to what followed immediately, which was maybe an even greater failure. The institutional attempt to just lie about reality.
Right? The spin.
Harris recounts being handed the campaign's prepped talking points, which were literally capitalized for emphasis. Joe Biden won.
And that he fought valiantly through his cold.
Right. And this is where a crucial lesson in personal credibility emerges, one that really transcends politics.
It does. Harris instantly rejected it. She threw the paper back on the table and gave a command that just cut through all the noise.
She said, "Don't feed me bullshit. Everyone saw what they saw."
And that was it. She recognized the futility of denying what was plain as day. She framed it brilliantly with the Richard Pryor analogy.
You gonna believe me or your lying eyes?
Exactly. She describes the few paces she took to the makeshift studio to give her on-record response as a literal death march, because she knew the weight of that moment.
That single decision to acknowledge the visible facts, to protect her own credibility, even when the institutional pressure was enormous, it had massive long-term political implications.
Well, by being honest about what happened, she salvaged her own reputation, didn't she?
She did. She created the necessary distance for the transition that was, about to unfold.
That honesty immediately set the stage for the most intense negotiation of her career, the high-stakes conversation that followed in the Oval Office.
And she describes the room not as this inspiring place of power, but as cold. She felt dwarfed by the long table.
The screens were dark.
The screens were dark except for the digital clock showing the time in current conflict zones.
Which is just a subtle, but wow, a potent reminder of the real gravity of the world outside this one political failure.
Yeah. And Biden was clearly delivering a speech he had already prepared, conceding that he might drop out.
He even referenced the irony of people throwing his own comments back at him about him seeing himself as a transitional leader.
And for Harris, this was the definitive confirmation. He was seriously considering it, and the transition was imminent.
What's so impressive in that moment is how she immediately shifts from just being a recipient of news to being a strategic negotiator.
Her insistence on a non-negotiable condition, the immediate simultaneous announcement and endorsement, was politically brilliant.
So why was that timing so critical? Why did it have to be simultaneous?
Because she argued that a gap of even a single day would be, in her words, ruinous for the party and for the country.
Right. If Biden announces he's dropping out and then a day later endorses his vice president, the airwaves would just be flooded with toxic questions.
Exactly. Why did he wait? Why hasn't he supported his VP? Is there a secret primary coming?
She shut down that organizational chaos before it could even start.
Her demands were immediate and so precise, aimed at protecting the integrity of her eventual campaign.
Can we slow it down so I can prepare?
And you need to endorse me at the exact same time.
She just recognized that the way this moment played out would be dissected for decades.
And the execution was just a blur. Biden's announcement that he wouldn't seek re-election hit social media 22 minutes after the call ended.
And his endorsement of Harris followed just 27 minutes later. That 5-minute gap. It's a testament to the speed of the transition, but it also reflects the precision of the planning they squeezed into that tiny, tiny window.
The resulting organized chaos was just infectious. Staffers rushed to the residence, some of them still in their workout clothes.
And the family meal table, the one that was supposed to be for that pancake breakfast, it instantly transformed into a political boiler room.
Making calls, trying to secure delegate support from former presidents, congressional leaders, influential labor leaders.
The book has these great fly-on-the-wall anecdotes here that really humanize the monumental pressure.
It does. We hear about her nieces, Mina and Tony, struggling to get Bill and Hillary Clinton on a conference call.
Or Mina trying to hide her cursing and frustration while they're talking about campaign logos and iconography.
It shows that even in these world-changing moments, the tech and the logistics can be just frustratingly human,
And the wisdom dispensed during all that chaos was potent. She details the conversation with former President Barack Obama,
who offered a measured but very firm assessment.
Saddle up. Joe did what I hoped he would do, but you have to earn it.
Wow. Obama's message just completely reframed the situation, didn't it?
It made it so clear.
Yeah.
This nomination wasn't some preordained gift from the establishment.
No.
It was an opportunity she had to immediately seize and validate on her own merit, plunging straight into the fight with absolutely no transition period.
And that urgency brings us to the logistics of the reorganization. I mean, the sheer necessity of remaking a national campaign machine in 107 days is just staggering.
They had to transition a political operation built around an 81-year-old incumbent into a historic campaign for a woman 25 years younger.
With a completely different energy, a completely different demographic appeal.
And the time frame was just unforgiving. One of her first acts was to stamp out the organizational chaos that some of the party were proposing.
The mini primary.
Committee primary. She immediately rejected that, asking a very practical question. How many precious days would they lose just trying to organize that?
Every single day mattered.
Every day. So the team had to be assembled instantly. Key hires were made on faith and speed. She brought in Kristen Bertolina Faust,
a strategist who literally packed up, left her family in Sacramento, and didn't leave Wilmington until after Election Day.
And David Plouffe, Obama's veteran campaign manager, joined as a senior advisor.
And he immediately urged her to take necessary risks, right?
Yeah, embracing platforms like TikTok and podcasts to reach younger voters. Just go for it.
The structural reorganization was massive. While they kept the Delaware headquarters as a logistical hub, they instantly opened new offices in Northern and Southern California.
Which was strategic. They were tapping into that rich local talent pool and deploying resources efficiently to crucial swing states like Nevada and Arizona.
States that require a hyper-local ground game.
Exactly. And the digital campaign? That needed a complete 180. Kirsten Allen started briefing the comms staff on Harris's detailed background, her personal values.
Recognizing that the digital strategy for her looked entirely different from the messaging they used for Biden.
They had to quickly define her identity, her biography, her vision to an American public that mostly knew her just as the second in command.
And that leads us to a surprisingly potent practical lesson from the book. The strategic choice of the pantsuit.
I found this fascinating. She deliberately chose pantsuits for maximum practicality.
Right. She notes that if you are constantly being photographed getting in and out of SUVs, rushing across a windy tarmac, climbing stairs,
the pantsuit just significantly reduces the chance of an embarrassing wardrobe malfunction.
And that detail is such a profound, if frustrating, reminder of the gendered judgment placed on women in public life.
Oh, absolutely. If a button is undone, if the wind catches a skirt, if the outfit is too professional or too informal,
it all risks overshadowing a consequential matter like foreign policy or a major domestic announcement.
You're constantly judged on your appearance. It's a dynamic male candidates just do not have to navigate.
Exactly. Her laugh, her tone of voice, her clothes, all of it was perpetually scrutinized, and it often overrode any substantive discussion.
So she had to meticulously manage that public image, while at the same time focusing on defining her contrast with the opposition.
Initially, her messaging was rooted in loyalty. Her first public appearance in Wilmington was largely dedicated to just effusively praising Joe Biden.
And acknowledging their genuine rapport. She talks about sharing parent quotes, making fun of the British, secretly ordering chocolate shakes together.
But that personal loyalty eventually collided head-on with political necessity.
Strategists, including the pragmatic David Plouffe, eventually urged her to drastically reduce her praise for Biden.
Stating the reality bluntly, people hate Joe Biden.
The campaign, they stressed, needed to be about defining her future, not defending a departing president with low approval ratings.
So she had to find a new core message. She defined the new campaign's intersection with the old at a rally at West Allis Central High School just outside Milwaukee.
And she challenged the foundational slogan of the opposition, "Make America Great Again,"
by pointing out that the operative word is again, which inherently implies regression and cruelty.
And she countered that regressive view with a powerful, immediate slogan that defined her vision.
We're not going back.
She notes that the audience immediately chanted it back, unprompted.
That's the moment a campaign finds its rhetorical footing, isn't it? A message that's both defensive of progress and also forward-looking.
Shifting to policy, she had this expansive vision. She considered the idea of a Secretary of Culture.
Focused on assigning value based on skill, not just a college degree, for federal jobs, increasing homeownership.
And directly addressing Gen Z's acute climate anxiety.
But the hard constraints of the 107-day clock forced a difficult political calculation she called triage.
Triage. She knew she had to leave out complex, nuanced topics. For instance, comprehensive climate policy.
It just requires a massive systemic overhaul. You can't fully explain that in the limited time she had to introduce herself and her platform.
And this is a powerful non-political lesson in project management.
Totally. You have to prioritize based on maximum impact and speed of penetration.
She noted that critical communication truth. People have to hear a message 3 times before it even starts to truly penetrate their consciousness.
So if a policy required a lengthy explanation or wasn't immediately galvanizing, she risked leaving votes on the table.
Especially with swing voters and those younger voters concerned about Gen Z issues.
No, the internal dynamics within the White House during this whole transition were, well, deeply complex.
While Harris genuinely admired Biden's experience in the Situation Room and shared core values with him, she admits her feelings were complicated.
Complicated by hurt and disappointment.
Yeah, stemming from how the administration had handled certain issues in the past.
She felt this intense personal duty to make sure Biden retained his dignity through the withdrawal process.
Especially since she sensed he didn't want to stop being president.
Her position was fundamentally delicate because of their history. She walked into the White House with what she called a rebuttable presumption.
This concept is key. Because she had challenged him so aggressively on busing during that 2019 primary debate, she felt she had to constantly prove her loyalty.
Adhering rigorously to the traditional unwritten rule number 1 for vice presidents.
Should they pee?
Exactly. This meant that any mistake, any lapse in judgment, even from her staff, was magnified as a potential sign of disloyalty.
But what the book details is how that proof of loyalty was often made impossible by the internal lack of support from Biden's own staff.
She gives these excruciatingly specific examples of White House staff failures.
For instance, staff failed to aggressively push back on the identity-based attacks against her.
The claims she was just a DEI hire or the mocking of her laugh.
Instead of highlighting her actual comprehensive resume, 2 terms as an elected DA, a senator representing 1 in 8 Americans. It was a clear failure to defend their own political asset.
Even worse, the book says staff often actively stalled the dissemination of good news coming out of her portfolio.
The Central America strategy is a perfect example. She secured $5.2 billion in new private investment,
which resulted in 70,000 new jobs and connected 2.5 million previously unbanked people to critical banking services.
This was a clear policy win, but the good news was just buried.
And, astonishingly, she recounts how some White House staffers actively amplified negative narratives.
They fueled the completely false fabrication that she had a chaotic office or that absurd claim that she faked a French accent after meeting with President Macron.
That French accent fabrication was allowed to completely overwhelm the positive news that she'd achieved a significant thaw in foreign relations with a key European ally.
It demonstrates this zero-sum, sometimes resentful mentality in parts of the West Wing. The idea that if Harris shines, it reflects poorly on Biden.
Failing to grasp that her success was, in fact, a testament to the stability of his administration.
And this internal friction was most acutely visible in her Central America assignment. Her actual stated role was to address the root causes of migration.
People fleeing fear for their lives, corruption gangs, and the inability to make a living because of, exacerbated climate events.
The data confirmed her strategy was working. In specific locations where these investments were deployed, the new enterprises and stability meant people were staying put.
But the political reality was brutal. White House staff stalled the good news, forcing her to shoulder the entire political blame for the porous border.
And nobody within the West Wing leadership advocated for her. Nobody asked, give her something she can win with.
The narrative only began to shift when a massive galvanizing crisis hit, where the administration, led by Biden, really struggled to define a clear path forward.
The Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade.
Precisely. Joe Biden struggled to lead on reproductive rights in a way that truly met the gravity of the moment.
And he effectively ceded the essential leadership role on this core issue to his vice president.
Harris seized that moment. She initiated a national tour, built a massive national coalition, bringing together state legislators, healthcare providers, activists.
And this focused advocacy was strategically pivotal. It completely upended the narrative that the Democrats were headed for a shellacking in the midterms.
It showed the power of a clear, galvanizing issue to cut through the political noise and drive real results, minimizing those historical losses that the president's party often suffers during the midterm cycle.
So with the clock just running down, only 107 days in total, the vice presidential selection process was intensely stressful.
She had only 16 days total for the entire vetting process, with just 11 remaining to select a running mate before the crucial Ohio ballot deadline.
The book says she considered a short list of 8 names, but it also reveals her initial preference was for Pete Buttigieg.
His credentials were ideal, right? Harvard, Rhodes Scholar, a successful cabinet secretary. In her words, an ideal partner in terms of policy knowledge and national profile.
But this is where political risk assessment completely superseded the ideal qualifications.
She concluded that Buttigieg, despite his obvious strengths, was too big of a risk.
Because the ticket was already asking America to accept a black woman married to a Jewish man.
They just couldn't afford to layer another historic, groundbreaking demographic onto the ticket and risk alienating moderate voters even further.
So the whole selection process became this almost comically secretive operation, which she dubbed the papal conclave.
They had to interview finalists, sometimes multiple times, without any press finding out. The level of operational security required was just extraordinary.
And it involved her social secretary, Storm Horncastle, and Storm's '99 Jeep Wrangler. They called it Operation Veep in a Jeep.
Which is great. Later, Storm was wisely told to swap the very noticeable Jeep for a tinted vehicle and use an alternate entrance to the residence that hadn't been used in 20 years.
All to maintain absolute secrecy.
And here's a little leadership nugget. Harris specifically tasked Storm, who was Norwegian and non-political, with collecting the finalists.
And why was that?
Because she wanted to see how each candidate treated someone they might perceive as less powerful or less central to the political process.
That's a crucial character test.
It is. She says she learned the sensitivity from watching her mother, a small brown woman with a foreign accent, encounter derision and disrespect.
So the 3 final candidates were Josh Shapiro, Tim Walz, and Mark Kelly. Start with Shapiro.
Highly popular in the critical swing state of Pennsylvania, a major political asset. But Harris had a nagging concern that surfaced in their discussions.
He kept asking questions about wanting to be in the room for every decision.
And that request proved to be the fatal flaw. Harris stated bluntly that this was an unrealistic expectation.
She reminded him that a VP is not a co-president.
She needed someone she could completely trust to manage their own portfolio and represent her vision without constant oversight. She concluded, "Every day as president, my VP can't be one."
Next was Tim Walz. He immediately impressed her with his authenticity, his willingness to be self-critical.
He admitted straight away that he was not a good debater and over-indexed his own liabilities.
He was a farmer, a guardsman, a teacher, and coach, and his diverse, down-to-earth background just resonated instantly.
The crucial quality for Walz, she writes, was his ability to notice who was not in the room and would know how to reach them.
So he didn't just see the political elite. He saw the working-class Americans, the teachers, the union members.
She writes that he reminded her of everyone she grew up with, plain-spoken, hard-working, and fundamentally a fighter.
And finally, there was Mark Kelly, an American hero, decorated captain, astronaut.
And they shared a specific, high-level expertise through their work on the National Space Council and the Artemis Accords.
Those are the non-binding principles for peaceful, cooperative civil space exploration,
which Harris was proud to have grown from 9 to 55 signatory countries during her tenure.
But the decisive factor for the final selection came back to the historical wisdom of Obama.
I chose Joe because we were very different. You cover more ground.
That advice reinforced the choice of Walz, who provided the crucial demographic and experiential contrast they needed to broaden the ticket's appeal beyond the existing base.
Beyond the professional partner selection, the book beautifully details the foundational role of her family.
Her sister, Maya Harris, took an immediate leave from the ACLU and the League of Women Voters to join the campaign.
Her brilliant brother-in-law, Tony West, was invaluable for legal and strategic advice.
And of course, Doug Emhoff, the second gentleman. He made this enormous personal sacrifice, leaving his law firm immediately upon the VP call to avoid any appearance of a conflict of interest.
His dedication was total. He was fiercely protective, famously barreling down an aisle to shove a man off the stage who tried to grab her mic.
And the book offers these powerful, candid insights into the dynamics of their blended family.
Harris and Doug made a conscious effort to go slowly with his children, Cole and Ella, and to ensure a close, respectful relationship with Kirsten Emhoff, Doug's ex-wife.
Which was vital preparation for the intense scrutiny of political life.
The pressure became so immense that the stress manifested as a major fight with Doug, a moment where he stopped the argument cold and declared, "We can't turn on each other."
And this led to that now famous intimate detail. Their social secretary, Storm Horncastle, intervened.
instructing Doug to write love notes on numbered cards in what Harris describes as Doug's chicken scratch for every single night they were apart.
That detail is so compelling because it shows that even at the highest levels of power, human relationships require intentional, small, sometimes awkward gestures to survive extreme sustained pressure.
It's a powerful practical lesson in intentional partnership under stress.
And what often gets overlooked in the campaign narrative is that Harris was still the sitting vice president. She was forced to confront intense international crises at the same time.
The book details the dramatic example of Alexei Navalny's death. She was due to speak at the Munich Security Conference when the news broke that the Russian opposition leader was dead in an icy gulag.
A deeply complex geopolitical moment. Navalny's murder came right before she was trying to secure the release of other political prisoners, Evan and Paul, in a complex prisoner swap.
She had to pivot instantly. She began her speech by expressing deep sorrow and stating clearly, Russia is responsible.
But her focus, despite the shock, remained on achieving that prisoner swap.
The Middle East dilemma was a constant heavyweight. She spent considerable time dealing with Prime Minister Netanyahu,
Whom she viewed as bent on undermining Joe Biden at every turn.
and while she firmly supported Israel's security and right to self-defense, she was highly critical of the ferocity of Netanyahu's response and the deliberate denial of aid to civilians.
She warned that these tactics were weakening Israel's moral and international standing.
She also details her strategic engagement with allies, like her meeting with the UAE's president, MBZ.
And MBZ was clear. Any Emirati investment in rebuilding Gaza required a clear, established path toward a Palestinian state.
The complexities were just staggering, trying to support an ally while pushing back on tactics that risked a wider regional conflagration.
And moving beyond policy, she details the pervasive political hate that was rooted purely in her identity. Trump attacked her as a dangerous San Francisco radical.
And she recounts this poignant anecdote from a female international leader who had also faced deeply personal, mean attacks based on her background.
This leader warned Harris, "Don't you ever let them make you cry." The woman herself had been called an ugly bird in the German media.
Wow, that anecdote is just a powerful illustration of the unique mental armor required by women in top-level politics.
And the hate peaked when Trump declared she was not black at the National Association of Black Journalists event.
Harris details her visceral internal reaction, emphasizing her decision to refuse the bait.
She told her staff, with brutal honesty, what next? I'll say I'm not a woman and I'll need to show my vagina.
She just refused to let him define her identity or distract from the issues that voters actually cared about.
The personal cost of this public scrutiny was immense, and it extended even to her family.
Laura Loomer, a far-right activist, surfaced details of Doug Emhoff's 15-year-old affair.
Forcing both Doug and his former wife, Kirsten, to issue public statements to protect their children and the teacher involved. This kind of attack is designed purely to degrade, distract, and dehumanize.
And Harris notes that as a woman running for president, she couldn't afford to be seen as distracted by personal drama.
She handled the crisis by supporting Doug and his former wife while maintaining absolute focus on the job. It highlights the profound vulnerability and lack of privacy for the modern political family.
We also have to spend time on the chilling topic of gun violence, which she addresses directly through the lens of her background as a prosecutor.
As someone who has seen the evidence firsthand.
She mentions the Appalachia high school shooting in Georgia, where 4 people, including 2 teachers, were killed.
And she noted the grim, almost unthinkable statistic, 83 school shootings in 2024, as of the date referenced in the book.
The most horrifying detail, which crystallized the failure of the system, was that the shooter's father gave him an AR-15-style weapon as a Christmas gift.
Despite the son having a Parkland shooter's picture and having been visited by police previously.
This systemic failure drove her to a provocative suggestion rooted in her experience as a prosecutor.
Lawmakers should be forced to look at autopsy photographs of what semi-automatic rifle fire does to a human body, especially a child's, before they are allowed to vote their conscience on gun legislation.
She argues that we're the only advanced country where the leading cause of death for children is guns, and politicians need to confront that gruesome reality.
With the election rapidly closing in, the next major hurdle was the debate itself.
Harris notes that Trump mocked her for taking 5 full days off the trail for preparation, bragging that he doesn't need it.
But she rightly dismissed this as just false bluster and was determined to do the rigorous work required.
The prep was intense and highly detailed. Her team went to extraordinary lengths, tricking out the ballroom of a hotel in Pittsburgh to exactly replicate the freezing set conditions.
The height of the podium, the lighting, everything. They even discovered the podium was too steep for a standard notepad, forcing them to adapt immediately.
And the preparation included a calculated dose of psychological torture.
Philippe Reigns, the Trump role player, was intentionally a total jerk throughout the whole rehearsal process.
Refusing to break character, using it as a high-level hazing.
This guaranteed she was completely ready for any provocation, no matter how irrational.
The strategic aim for the actual debate was crystal clear. She didn't need to be the biggest wonk or win on arcane policy details.
She needed to walk off that stage, leaving voters comfortable that you have what it takes to be president.
It was purely about projecting a presidential demeanor. Confident, clear, and absolutely unrattled.
When it came to the actual debate, Harris recounts several brilliant, spontaneous retorts. When Trump claimed to be a champion of law and order,
She called the comment rich, given his numerous felony convictions. She writes that she heard him gasp audibly when she mentioned his convictions.
it demonstrates the impact of using his own recent legal history against him.
She also describes the constant frustration of dealing with his relentless lies, particularly the defund the police accusation.
Even with her microphone strategically turned off, she countered "Don't lie," a moment that was captured on camera.
She understood his tactic. Say the most outrageous things so that everyone chases the heat, distracting from the actual substance like the massive economic implications of his tariffs.
Her media strategy had to be just as aggressive. It included confronting hostile outlets head-on, like her interview with Bret Baier on Fox News.
She recognized that Baier was likely scared of the Magier base and would therefore go hard on her, trying to score points for his audience.
But she used that opportunity strategically to deliver facts directly to a hostile audience.
When Baier tried to refute her criticism of Trump calling opponents the enemy within, with a cherry-picked, edited clip, she immediately challenged his selective editing.
Quoting General Mark Milley to reinforce the genuine danger Trump posed to military-civilian relations.
And this brings us to maybe the most revealing moment of internal strategic conflict, the loyalty test on The View.
Where Sonny Hostin posed that pointed question. If anything, would you have done something differently than President Biden?
Harris describes her painful internal struggle. She didn't want to elevate herself by actively pushing someone else down.
She felt she owed loyalty, especially since they still had 3 months left in the administration. But more than that, she feared opening the door to a slew of never-ending follow-up questions.
Questions that would force her to look backward rather than forward.
This choice offers a vital lesson in leadership, and we challenge you, the audience, to consider it.
How do you manage personal loyalty to a flawed partner versus the strategic necessity of defining your own distinct vision for the future?
Her choice was driven by a deep conviction in the necessity of maintaining a zone of trust between a president and vice president, even when that trust cost her politically.
And finally, she brought the campaign to a powerful closing argument with her acceptance speech. She deliberately focused on her own personal story.
Growing up in a neighborhood of nurses and firefighters, her mother's struggle for home ownership, her sister on banana seat bikes.
The meaning of "for the people" became the central pillar of her narrative, directly connecting to her background as a prosecutor. Choosing that path after a friend confided abuse, charging cases in the name of the people, having only one client, the people, it was a determined attempt to make her highly unlikely story relatable to everyone.
So Election Day arrived with the campaign prepared for 2 outcomes, a victory speech or an optimistic holding statement.
But the campaign staff soon delivered the painful final reality check.
The book details the moment Jen O'Malley Dillon, J.O.D., the campaign manager, called Sheila Nix, recommending that Harris should absolutely not go to Howard University as planned.
Because the math was finalized, there was no path to victory. The atmosphere in the campaign instantly shifted from frantic activity to just stunned silence.
And the painful, profound personal cost of that loss is captured in an intimate, devastating detail. She returns to the residence and hears her grandnieces, Amara and Leela, crying through the wall.
Her immediate internal reaction was denial and bargaining, thinking, we can still do something about this.
But despite the internal emotional storm and the raw grief, she knew her public duty was paramount. She had to uphold democratic norms.
She quickly made the difficult decision to concede and affirm the peaceful transfer of power, the very norm Trump had flouted 4 years earlier.
But the concession was not a surrender of the fight. She had to reconcile their famous chant, "When we fight, we win," with the reality of defeat.
Her ultimate message became one of long-term endurance. Sometimes the fight takes a while. That doesn't mean that we won't win.
The final poignant image of the campaign is Harris standing on the stage at Howard, embracing Tim Walz's distraught daughter, Hope.
And seeing her Auntie Lenore, her mother's best friend, in the crowd, it was a powerful personal reminder that her fight was just the newest chapter in the long, exhausting history of the struggle for civil rights and progress.
Let's turn to the necessary but brutal post-election diagnosis. 2 trending searches immediately after the election were alarming indicators of the disconnect between voting and understanding policy.
What is a tariff, and can I change my vote?
It suggested that a significant portion of the electorate voted without understanding the core economic consequences of the opposition's proposals.
The diagnosis goes far deeper than tariffs. The book addresses the frightening reality of Project 2025, the detailed blueprint for radical change planned by the opposition.
She details that of its 316 stated objectives, 114 have already been fully realized and 64 more are actively in progress. This confirms the blueprint is being executed with terrifying efficiency.
And this leads to the major realization for Harris: the guardrails that were supposed to protect democracy.
The executive agencies, the judiciary, the legislative processes, corporate independence, the media,
They were buckling. She admits she had assumed they would be inherently stronger, and that assumption proved tragically wrong.
her focus for the future immediately shifts to Gen Z, the largest generation. She advocates for massive investment, similar in scope to the GI Bill.
But critically focused not just on traditional college degrees, but also on trades, skills, and vocational training to adapt to the realities of AI and economic change.
She specifically wants to eliminate degree requirements for 500,000 federal jobs in favor of skills-based hiring.
The book concludes with a moment of needed consolation, a quote from Minyon Moore.
God gave you a beautiful 107 days to reclaim who you are. You gave America your heart and soul.
But Harris ends the book with a profound reflection that represents a massive shift in her approach. She's no longer sure that working within the failing system is enough.
For decades, she sought a seat at the table to make change from the inside.
But seeing the guardrails buckle makes her committed to being with the people in towns and communities, ready to rebuild trust and empathy from the ground up outside the failing institutions.
The lessons extracted from this highly specific political account, the necessity of professional triage in crisis, the definition of personal purpose in the shadow of giants, the management of loyalty under duress, and profound resilience in the face of spectacular failure. They're vital for anyone striving for leadership.
We challenge you, the audience. How will you step up when your guardrails are tested? How will you let the ideas in this book enhance your life and improve your own crisis management skills?
This podcast episode, exploring the compelling and suspenseful account in this book, 107 Days by Kamala Harris, has been an incredible journey through the high-stakes world of modern American politics.
We strongly urge you to purchase the book to experience the full context and the detailed, intimate stories we discussed today.
And please engage with the author and the themes on social media, actively participating in the ongoing dialogue about these critical issues of leadership and democracy.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Plain Books Podcast. Follow, subscribe, and share this podcast if you found value in this conversation. Until next time, stay informed and keep learning.